Welcome to HFY Vanguard, the chronicles of a species too stubborn to lose. And this chapter starts now.
The storm had no name. It arrived out of nowhere, born from a horizon that once shimmered with serene blue light but now boiled in violent motion. Within hours, the skies above Neridia darkened to a bruised indigo, lightning carving veins of white fire through the clouds. Rain fell in endless sheets, a furious deluge that erased the borders between sea and sky. From high above the flooded streets, the patrol cruiser of Ranger Callum Anderson cut through the chaos like a lone shard of silver. The wipers thrashed uselessly against the downpour. Every sensor screamed warnings: water pressure rising, wind speed critical, structural failure imminent. But Callum kept flying, jaw tight, knuckles white against the controls. "Patrol Unit 731, came the voice over his comms, sharp, metallic, commanding. "Return to station immediately. All human personnel are ordered to stand down. This is an internal Neridian matter," he almost laughed. Internal matter. The whole damn planet was drowning, and they were worried about jurisdiction. "Copy that, Command," he said, though the sarcasm didn't quite hide the anger. Returning to base. He didn't turn back. 6 years stationed on this world. And still the Neridian High Council treated humans like a temporary inconvenience. Useful only when the planet needed fixing. Disposable when politics demanded distance. His cruiser banked over a district once famous for its gleaming markets and tall glass spires. Now, those same towers jutted from a rising ocean like broken teeth. Beneath the surface, electric arcs flickered, signs of a city's heart short-circuiting under the sea. He could almost hear it die. Then something moved. At first, he thought it was debris, a flicker of motion between the swirling waves. But as the lightning flashed, he saw them. A woman standing chest-deep in the flood, clutching a child to her chest. Her hair, silver blue, glinting faintly even through the rain, was plastered to her slender shoulders. Her skin shimmered like wet crystal, that unmistakable Neridian tone of bioluminescent azure. And her eyes, large, luminous, terrified, locked on his cruiser for the briefest moment. Nobody else was stopping. The streets below were chaos, figures rushing through knee-deep water, desperate to save themselves, ignoring those weaker or slower. The Neridians prided themselves on efficiency, on cold logic. Empathy wasn't part of their survival code. Callum's hand hovered over the throttle. Regulations burned in his memory like iron brands. No interference during native emergencies. No contact unless sanctioned by planetary command. He exhaled sharply. Damn the regulations. He pulled the lever, angling the cruiser down. The engine screamed in protest as the craft cut through the storm, turbines splashing geysers of water aside. Floodlight beams swept across the intersection, revealing the woman's pale face, the small form clinging to her neck. The cruiser's hatch opened with a hiss. Rain instantly drenched him, soaking his uniform, running in rivulets down the collar of his armor. He stepped out onto the wing platform, bracing himself against the wind. "Take my hand," he shouted. The woman froze. Her eyes darted to the insignia on his shoulder, the winged silver crest of the human Ranger Corps. To her, it meant outsider. To many Neridians, it meant invader. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The world seemed to narrow to the space between them, the roaring rain, the child's whimper, the desperate pounding of his heart. "I'll help you," he said, softer this time. "Please, trust me." Something shifted in her gaze. A decision made in silence. She lifted her daughter higher, then reached out. Her slender blue fingers wrapped around his hand, cold but strong. He pulled hard, muscles straining, the storm fighting every inch of his effort. The child slipped for a second, and he caught her with his other arm, hoisting both into the cruiser's cabin. The hatch sealed behind them, shutting out the roar of the world. For a moment, only the sound of their breathing filled the space. "Thank you," the woman said at last. Her voice was musical even through exhaustion. "I am Estia. This is my daughter, Mixa." "Callum Anderson," he replied. "Ranger Corps, and apparently today's rule breaker." Mixa peeked at him from her mother's arms, eyes bright and uncertain, strands of silver hair sticking to her cheeks. The child couldn't have been more than 8 cycles old. She looked terrified and curious all at once. Outside, thunder cracked so loudly the cruiser shook. Warning lights flared across the control board. "Hold tight," Callum muttered, swinging into the pilot seat. "We're not safe yet." He guided the ship through the flooded corridors of what had once been the Neridian capital's commerce sector. Holographic billboards flickered beneath the rising waves, ghostly advertisements from a civilization drowning in its own brilliance. Estia sat silently, cradling her child, eyes flicking from window to window. There was something deeper than fear there, grief maybe. Loss. "How long has it been raining like this?" Callum asked, mostly to keep her talking. "3 cycles, she answered. "But never this strong. It's different. He'd heard rumors from the human research posts, patterns in Neridia's weather system that didn't align with natural physics. He'd dismissed them as speculation. Now he wasn't so sure. The radar pinged. A new alarm blared. Collision proximity. Before he could react, a shadow crashed through the viewport. A collapsed tower, torn free by the flood, slammed against the cruiser's flank. Metal screamed. The ship lurched sideways. Estia cried out, shielding Mixa as sparks rained from the ceiling. "Propulsion damaged," the onboard AI announced with infuriating calm. "Hull integrity compromised." "Of course it is," Callum growled, wrestling the controls. The cruiser tilted sharply, one engine coughing smoke. "We're going down. Can you land?" Estia's voice trembled, but she wasn't panicking. Working on it. Through the rain-streaked glass, he spotted the dark silhouette of an old building rising above the floodwaters. Massive columns, ornate spires. The architecture screamed wealth and abandonment. "The Commerce Guild Hall," Estia said quickly. "It's built on reinforced ground." "Then that's where we're headed." The cruiser skimmed across the surface like a skipping stone, engines screaming. Callum barely managed to line up with the grand staircase before the craft's belly struck stone. The impact jolted through his bones. "Go!" he shouted. "I'll grab the emergency kit." Estia didn't hesitate. She lifted Mixa and splashed into the waist-deep water, climbing the stairs as lightning clawed across the sky. Callum followed moments later, clutching a survival pack as the cruiser sank behind them, its lights vanishing into the dark. They reached the towering doors of the guild hall, ancient, weathered, sealed tight. Callum threw his shoulder against one. It didn't move. He tried again. On the third shove, the doors groaned open with a sound like the planet itself sighing. Inside lay darkness. He cracked a luminescent rod from his pack. Blue light spilled out, revealing a vast hall, murals of Neridian history, shattered sculptures, water dripping from the ceiling in rhythmic beats. "It's beautiful," Mixa whispered, her small voice echoing. "Let's hope it's also safe," Callum said. He sealed the doors behind them and activated a portable heater. The air warmed slowly, steam rising from their drenched clothes. Estia wrung the water from her silver hair, watching him with cautious curiosity. "You disobeyed orders to save us," she said. "Why?" He met her gaze evenly. "Where I come from, we don't leave people to drown, no matter what species they are." She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether that was bravery or foolishness. "The Neridian way is different. Self-preservation above all. It's how we've survived." He smiled faintly. "Maybe surviving isn't the same as living." For the first time, her lips curved upward, a small, hesitant smile, but real. Outside, the storm raged on, hammering the ancient walls. Inside, amid the ruins of a drowned world, 3 lives had collided by chance, or maybe something more. Callum didn't know it yet. But the choice he'd made, to extend a hand when everyone else turned away, would ripple far beyond this night. It would change the fate of 2 species. But for now, as lightning painted brief flashes across Estia's face and her daughter curled asleep beside her, he only knew one thing for certain. He'd broken every rule that mattered, and for the first time in years, it felt right. The storm did not fade. It merely changed shape, turning from the chaos of wind into the relentless rhythm of falling water. The sound filled the ancient hall like a heartbeat from the sky. Callum stood by the sealed entrance, watching the flood creep higher along the stairs outside. Through a crack in the door, the city glowed faintly beneath the water, a world of drowned lights and ghosts. Behind him, the soft hum of the portable heater spread a fragile warmth across the vast, echoing space. Estia sat cross-legged near it, her daughter asleep beside her. wrapped in one of the silver thermal blankets from his pack. For the first time since the rescue, silence pressed between them, uncomfortable, dense with unspoken questions. "You should rest," Callum said quietly, his voice rough from shouting over the storm earlier. "You've both been through hell." Estia's eyes lifted to him. Even exhausted, they carried that alien luminescence, shifting between turquoise and deep-sea blue. "You're human," she said, as though she still couldn't quite believe it. "Stationed here long?" "6 years," he replied, moving closer to the heater. "Long enough to know your people don't like mine very much." Her expression didn't change. "We don't dislike you, we just don't trust outsiders who came to our world offering help and then stayed." "That's one way to put it," Callum muttered, taking off one of his gloves and holding his hand near the heater. His knuckles were scraped raw from forcing open the door. "You could have followed orders," Estia said after a moment. "You didn't have to stop." He looked at her, meeting her gaze. "I couldn't just fly past." She tilted her head slightly, studying him as though he were an anomaly in a research lab. "Most Neridians would have." "Yeah," he said, smiling faintly. "That's probably why I'm not one." For a while, the only sound was the steady patter of rain on the roof. Mixa stirred in her sleep, murmuring something in the lilting cadence of the Neridian tongue. Estia brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead, her touch gentle, practiced. "She's strong," Callum said softly. "She has to be," Estia replied. "Her father—" She stopped herself, the words catching like debris in the current of her voice. Callum didn't press. He could see the grief in the small, reflexive motions, the way her fingers lingered on her daughter's hair, the sudden stillness that came when she realized she'd said too much. Instead, he changed the subject. "How bad does it get here?" "The flooding." She glanced toward the dripping archways. "Worse each cycle. Our scientists said it was atmospheric instability, that we'd adapt as we always do." Her tone turned bitter. "But adaptation has its limits." Callum leaned back against a crumbling pillar. "You think it's natural?" Estia hesitated, then shook her head. "No storm should behave like this. The rain, the pressure shifts. It feels engineered." He frowned. "Engineered? By who?" "By those who profit when the lower districts drown." Her eyes darkened, her voice nearly a whisper. "There are families in the high towers who see catastrophe as a cleansing. Less mouths to feed, less rebellion." Callum's stomach tightened. It wasn't the first time he'd heard something like that, but hearing it from her made it real. "And your government just watches?" "They claim control, but no one controls the sky anymore." Thunder boomed overhead as if to punctuate her words. The heater flickered, briefly dimming. He reached into his pack, checking the backup cells. "We've got power for another 12 hours. After that, we'll need to find something higher." "Higher won't save us if the storms keep rising," Estia murmured. For a long while, they said nothing. The air between them carried the faint scent of ozone and wet metal. When Callum finally spoke, his voice was softer. "Back on Earth, when a storm like this hit, people came together. Neighbors helped each other. Sometimes it didn't matter who they were, what side they were on. Survival made everyone human." Estia looked at him, her expression unreadable. "And that's what makes you different," she said finally. "Humans value connection. We value endurance." He gave a small, tired grin. "Endurance without compassion just sounds like loneliness." Something flickered behind her eyes. Something fragile, like a crack forming in glass. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for her satchel, pulling out a small metallic pendant shaped like a spiral shell. She turned it over in her hands before speaking. "This belonged to my husband," she said quietly. He was a meteorologist. He used to say the weather was the planet's way of remembering, that storms were memory made visible. "That's poetic," Callum said, surprised. "He said too many poetic things," Estia murmured, half smiling. "It made people nervous, especially those in power." She placed the pendant back around her neck and stared into the heater's blue flame. "They took him 3 cycles ago. Said he died in an accident. And you don't believe that?" Her eyes met his. "No. He told me he'd discovered something, patterns in the storm data that couldn't occur naturally. He said if he disappeared, I should protect Mixa and find the truth." Callum exhaled slowly. "That's a heavy promise," she nodded once, "and I've failed to keep it." "Until you came," he blinked, caught off guard. "Me? If you hadn't stopped," she said simply, "we'd be part of the debris by now." Her voice carried no melodrama, just truth. Callum looked at her, really looked at her. The faint luminescence of her skin in the heater glow, the silver hair framing eyes that had seen too much loss. She was alien, yes, but the pain in her face was painfully familiar. "You're not the only one who's lost people," he said quietly. Her gaze softened. "War?" He nodded. "Earth had its storms too. Ours just came with uniforms instead of rain." For a while, neither spoke. But something had changed between them, a shared understanding, invisible but undeniable. The heater flickered again. Estia shifted closer unconsciously, her shoulder brushing his arm. He could feel the faint coolness of her skin even through the fabric. "You're cold," he said. "So are you," she countered, almost teasing. He smiled. "Maybe we should both move closer to the heater." She hesitated, then did. The distance between them shrank until only a breath separated their shoulders. Outside, the storm screamed against the walls, trying to claw its way inside. But here, in this small pocket of warmth, time seemed to pause. Mixa sighed softly in her sleep. Estia reached over to adjust the blanket around her daughter, her movements tender, precise. Then she looked back at Callum, her expression softer now. "Humans," she said thoughtfully, "always breaking rules for strangers." "Only the good ones," he said, and she smiled again. Just a flicker, but enough. He wasn't sure when exhaustion claimed him. The rhythmic drumming of rain, the dim light, the heat, all of it blurred together into a heavy calm. When he woke hours later, the heater had gone dark. The storm outside still raged, but softer now, a distant rumble instead of a war cry. Estia was awake, sitting by one of the shattered windows. Her silver-blue hair shimmered faintly in the dim dawn, and her gaze was far away, lost in the drowned horizon. "You should sleep," he murmured. "I can't," she said without turning. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the water rising higher." He moved to sit beside her. "It won't rise forever." She looked at him, the faintest spark of hope in her expression. "You sound certain." "I have to be," he said simply. "Otherwise none of this means anything." Outside, the rain slowed to a mist, the first fragile light of morning piercing through the clouds. The flood still shimmered below them, an endless ocean reflecting the broken skyline. Estia's voice was barely a whisper. "My people say the sea forgets everything, that once something sinks beneath it, it's gone forever." Callum met her gaze, steady and calm. "Then maybe it's time someone taught the sea how to remember." She held his eyes for a long heartbeat. Then, for the first time since the storm began, she nodded, and in that quiet ruin of glass and water, among two species who'd never trusted each other, a fragile alliance was born, made not of treaties or orders, but of something far simpler and infinitely stronger: faith. Night kept its grip on the city like a bruise. The storm had not so much passed as rearranged itself into a darker, more deliberate pattern. Shorter, sharper gusts. Rain that came in sheets and then in calm like a predator testing its prey. In the dim light of the Commerce Guild's executive suite, Callum watched droplets trace slow rivers down the glass, each one carrying a tiny upside-down fragment of the drowned skyline. He had slept in fits and starts, always half awake, listening for the sound of metal tearing, for the dull thud of some failing structure. He woke with his throat tight and the default reflex to scan for danger, a habit that refused to sleep. Estia stirred beside Mixa and opened her eyes to the same gray world he saw. A city reduced to islands, towers jutting like broken bones through the flood. Her fingers found the pendant at her neck and clutched it, a small wolf against the memory of a man who had been more than a husband. A scientist, a warning, a ghost. The memory made her hands shake, not from the cold, but from what she'd lost, and what she feared still lived beneath the surface. "You said Kalen saw something," Callum said after a long silence. He kept his voice low. The heater hummed as their only companion. "Patterns in the storms." Estia looked at him then, and in that moment her face was all careful lines and quiet grief. "He thought the patterns were deliberate," she said. "He studied them for years. He told me, before he disappeared, that the frequencies in the upper atmosphere were being altered. Tiny resonances, he called them. Like turning a planet into an instrument and playing it until it answered." Callum felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Who would do that? Why would anyone make storms on purpose? She swallowed. People with power and little conscience. People who benefit from chaos. Those in charge of contracts and supply routes. People who can sell protection while cities drown. Her voice was flat, stripped of novelty. She had said the words before, but now they hung heavier, more personal. Callum reached out, hand hovering over hers for a moment before resting it on the back of her hand. Simple contact. A human gesture calibrated for comfort across species. You said they took him, he murmured. You said the authorities said it was an accident. I was told he fell from an observation deck. An unfortunate misstep while checking sensors, she replied. I saw the footage before they erased it. Gray sky, a flash on the monitor, then nothing. But Kalen's notes. He sent a packet to a colleague, an encrypted fragment, and told me where to look if anything happened to him. He said, if I disappear, trust the data, not the people who bury it. And you never found the rest. No. Her jaw tightened. I searched. I was watched. They followed me once, a shadow that smelled of municipal authority and intent. When I asked questions, I was told to stop. When I persisted, they smiled the way predators smile. Callum studied her. There was no theatrical flourish in her grief, only facts recited like instruments methodically played. That was what made it more real, the absence of melodrama. He thought of the human embassy's warnings about getting involved. He thought of the Ranger Corps' manuals that labeled emotional risks as operational liabilities. He thought of the warning the Council had broadcast across his comm the night before. Stand down. Internal matter. He almost believed it was an ordinary matter, until the door burst open. 3 figures filled the doorway, silhouettes cut against the stormlight. They wore the ceremonial uniforms of city officials, long flowing robes adapted for the wet climate, insignia gleaming with uncomfortable authority. At their head was a man whose presence seemed to command the room before his voice did, Counselor Taryn. Tall, with an emperor's bearing and skin the deep, saturated blue of Neridian nobility, his face was a carved mask of control. When he stepped into the heater's glow, the room felt smaller, as if the walls themselves were bending away from his will. Estia Nex, he said, and the name landed like a gauntlet. You should not be here. Estia straightened. The tired lines in her face hardened. Counselor Taryn, she replied. Funny moment to visit. The flood makes for bad timing. Taryn's dark eyes slid to Callum, and his lip curled. And you, this human, breaking protocol to interfere in Neridian affairs. The Council will want an explanation. Callum bristled, hand hovering near the blaster at his hip, though he kept it holstered. We were seeking shelter. I rescued them. Taryn's expression went steely. You interfered with justice by harboring possible traitors to the Council, he said. You will come with us. Estia laughed once, sharp and short, the sound of someone slicing at suffocating air. Traitor. My husband was a scientist who spoke truth to a room that preferred lies. And your hands are stained with what he discovered. Her words were knife-edged by grief. Taryn's jaw tightened. He had power to crush, and people under him who knew how to make laws into traps. You make accusations lightly, he said, each syllable a tonic of menace. Accusations without proof are slanderous. She met him without flinching. You place devices across the northern hemisphere, she said. You partnered with syndicates who profit from selling weather control to the highest bidder. You let storms wash away groups you labeled inconvenient. A hush fell. Even the rain seemed to wait. Callum watched several of the officials in the doorway shift, exchanges passing like ripples across water. Something here had touched an old seam. He had the sense that a single match could set the room alight. How dare you? Taryn's voice rose, dangerously close to a snarl. He stepped forward. These are treasonous charges. Estia, you are either delusional from grief or actively conspiring against the Council. We will not tolerate— You killed him, Estia interrupted, and the air itself seemed to gasp. Taryn froze, that practiced mask snapping for a microscopic second. That is an outrageous accusation. His hands tightened at his sides like coiled ropes. Guards, Callum's instincts spooled into motion. 6 steps, assess, cover, calm. He moved slightly, positioning himself between Estia and the door. He was outnumbered, yes, but not helpless. And he would not let a woman and her child be hauled away to die in some cell while a politician polished his reputation. One of the officials, softer eyes, younger, stepped forward and placed a calming hand on Taryn's sleeve. Counselor, Perhaps we should not escalate before the storm passes. The plea was careful, political. Terran's gaze burned over Estia like heat. He did not step back entirely, but he pulled himself together with the discipline of someone who had never been allowed to lose control publicly. "This is not over," he said coldly. "You will answer to the council. If your claims hold any weight, we shall see. If they do not—" His meaning trailed like a threat. Estia watched him, a long, slow tide of contempt washing over her features. "You will be judged, Terran," she said softly. "Either by your colleagues or by your conscience. If you have one left." She turned to Callum. "We can't stay here. They'll come for us." Callum scanned the layout through the dim light, thinking 2-3 moves ahead. "We need to get the fragments he mentioned," he said. "If Kalen scattered his data, we can use that to show the pattern, show the resonators exist. How?" Estia asked, voice taut. "They control the archives. Most servers are locked and access logs are maintained by the council. Then we use what he gave you," Callum replied. "Names, locations, anything. Lead me where you hid the fragments." She hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down like the flood itself. For the first time since they met, there was doubt in her eyes, a question that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with trust. Could she risk the little she had for an outsider? Could she gamble her daughter's life on a ranger's gut? Estia looked at Mixa, sleeping in the crook of her arm, and the answer came with the simplicity of a mother who had no choice but to be brave. "There are encrypted fragments," she said. "My husband left coordinates. They're on a small device locked in a storage locker at the old Sciences Depot. It's about an hour by water if we can move fast." Callum nodded. "Then we move now." He keyed his wristcom and sent a short encrypted ping to the embassy with their location, the move of a man who knew better than to act without a backup. He did it because instinct told him it was the right thing, because the human in him refused to leave innocent voices to drown, because beneath the roar and the regulations and the diplomatic warnings, some simple code refused to break. You help those who cannot help themselves. Terran watched them prepare with a serenity that was all calculation. "You will not get far," he said coldly. "We will find you." Callum answered with a look steady as an anchor. "We'll see who's searching for what." As they slipped out into the rain, stealthy, purposeful, a small band moving against the current, the city seemed to tilt, the sky pressing down like judgment. They were small and flawed and terrified, but they had momentum. A woman with a secret, a child with a future, and a human who had broken the rules. Between them, like a fragile compass, lay the possibility that the truth could still be pulled from the deep. The corridors of the Commerce Guild loomed like the hollow ribs of a dead leviathan. Every footstep echoed against marble and glass, swallowed instantly by the whisper of the storm outside. The flood below had risen another meter, turning the city into a pale reflection of the sky, a shimmering mirror of destruction. Callum led the way through the half-lit hallways, pulse pounding, one hand on his blaster, the other gripping the emergency pack slung across his shoulder. Estia followed close behind, her daughter cradled in her arms, the girl half asleep, her small fingers clutching a strand of her mother's hair. They moved in silence until they reached a high balcony overlooking the central plaza, a sea of water glittering with floating debris and electric sparks. Distant towers bent under the weight of the storm, their tips wreathed in lightning. "We can't leave tonight," Callum said, scanning the horizon. "The current's too strong. We'd be torn apart before we got 100 meters. Estia nodded, though every muscle in her body screamed to keep moving. "Then we stay until dawn," she whispered. "But we'll need to reach the depot before they do." Agreed. They barricaded the heavy door of the executive suite and settled back into uneasy stillness. The heater hummed softly, throwing shadows against the cracked mural walls. Callum worked quietly, checking the blaster's charge, rationing the protein bars, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Estia sat beside Mixa, stroking her daughter's hair as she slept. The child's breathing was soft and even, her body curled beneath the thin blanket. The innocence of that small shape struck Callum harder than any bullet could have. "You're good with her," he said quietly. Estia glanced up, a faint smile ghosting across her lips. "She's all I have left of him, Kalen," she nodded. "He used to tell her bedtime stories about Earth," she said. "He thought humans were reckless but brave. He said you were capable of compassion even when logic said otherwise." He admired that. Callum gave a low chuckle. Most of us are just trying not to mess things up too badly. Then maybe that's what bravery really is, she said softly. Choosing to care anyway. He met her eyes across the flickering blue light. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was electric, dense with everything that didn't need words. The heater flickered, sputtered, then steadied again. Estia shifted closer unconsciously, the faint bioluminescence of her skin casting a ghostly glow across his armor. Callum's breath caught. The sight of her so near, so otherworldly, and yet so achingly human in her exhaustion and grace. He tore his gaze away, busying himself with the emergency kit. You should rest, he murmured. I can't, she said. Every time I close my eyes, I see the tower falling. I hear the water. Then talk to me, he said, still not looking at her. About anything else, Estia tilted her head. You're used to giving orders, aren't you? Habit, he said. Comes with the job. She smiled faintly. And what job is that now, Ranger Anderson? Savior of stray aliens? He looked up then, and the tension that had been coiling between them since the moment he pulled her from the flood broke loose. Just a man who doesn't like watching people die, he said quietly. Something in her expression softened. That's a dangerous habit here, I've been told. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. A low groan echoed through the structure, the sound of the building settling under the pressure of the storm. Estia stood and crossed the short distance between them. You risked your life for us, she said. You'll lose everything for it. Maybe, Callum said. But some things are worth losing. Her eyes searched his face, as though trying to read a language written in his scars. You sound like Kalen, she said finally. He used to believe in people. He thought we could change the system from within. And you? I used to believe him, she whispered, until they made me a widow. The heater flickered again, dimming the light until the world shrank to the space between them. He could see the tremor in her hands, the kind that came not from fear, but from holding too much inside for too long. Without thinking, he reached out, brushing his thumb across her knuckles. She didn't pull away. I'm sorry, he said softly. For him. For what they did. Estia's voice trembled. Don't be. Just don't let them win. They sat like that for a long while, silent side by side, the rain whispering against the glass. And then, as if drawn by gravity, she leaned toward him. Her hand lifted to his face, fingertips tracing the line of his jaw. You're staring again, she said, her tone a fragile attempt at humor. Maybe I can't help it. She smiled faintly, then her voice dropped to a whisper. Is this common human behavior? Staring at strangers in the middle of a flood? Only when the stranger's unforgettable, he said. Her laugh was quiet, disbelieving, but her eyes didn't look away. For a heartbeat, the universe shrank to the space between them, breath mingling. Heartbeats quickening, the storm outside fading to a dull roar. Then her lips met his. The kiss was soft at first, uncertain, as if both were testing the limits of their own sanity. Then suddenly it deepened. Desperation, grief, relief, all of it colliding in that single reckless moment. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. You shouldn't have done that, she whispered. Probably not, he said. But I don't regret it. Neither of them spoke again for a long time. The rain became a lullaby, the heaters hummed the rhythm beneath it. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them both. Dawn came pale and uncertain. Mix's voice broke the quiet first. Mama, Estia stirred, blinking herself awake. She was still wrapped in the thin blanket, the faint morning light tracing the contours of her blue skin. Callum, half awake beside her, sat up quickly, running a hand through his hair. The little girl stood at the edge of the makeshift bed, her expression innocent and puzzled. Why are you and the human sleeping together? She asked. Is he cold too? Estia flushed a darker shade of blue. We were sharing warmth, she said carefully. Humans and Neridians have different ways of showing friendship. Mixa frowned, considering this seriously. Like how the children at school do the water blessing and we do the morning song. Exactly, Estia said quickly, relief softening her tone. Callum bit back a grin as he pulled on his jacket. I think I like the morning song better. Mixa tilted her head. Do humans sing? Only when no one's listening, he said. The child giggled, and for a fleeting moment the world felt almost normal. Then Callum's wristcom beeped, a sharp digital tone that shattered the fragile calm. He froze, staring at the flashing alert. Incoming transmission. He hesitated for only a second before answering. Anderson here. The voice that came through was clipped. Official. Ranger Anderson, this is Captain Holt, Embassy Security. We've locked onto your beacon. Report status. Callum glanced at Estia, who tensed instantly. My cruiser's down, he said. I'm with 2 Neridian civilians seeking shelter. The city's flooded beyond safe levels. There was a pause. Then Holt's tone hardened. We've received reports that you violated non-interference protocols. The Neridian Council is demanding your surrender. Estia's eyes widened. Sir, Callum said evenly, I rescued a woman and her child from drowning. If that's a violation, I'll accept the consequences later. Another pause. Then Holt's voice dropped to a grim whisper. There's more. The Council's accusing humans of abducting their citizens during the crisis. The story's spreading fast. Estia stood, fury flickering behind her eyes. He's lying, she said loudly enough for the comm to catch. Councillor Terran is spreading propaganda to hide his crimes. There was a stunned silence on the line. Who is that? Holt demanded. Estia Nex, she said before Callum could stop her. My husband, Kalen Nex, was chief meteorologist for the Neridian Science Council. He discovered evidence that the storms are artificial, and he was murdered for it. A long pause. Then Holt's tone changed completely. Ms. Nex, those are serious allegations. I have proof. She lied smoothly, her voice steady as stone. But I need safe passage for myself and my daughter. Callum turned to her, surprise and admiration mingling in his expression. She'd just played the most dangerous card possible. Finally, Holt spoke again. Stay where you are. Extraction in 30 minutes. When the signal cut off, silence filled the room. You don't actually have proof, do you? Callum asked quietly. Estia's lips pressed into a thin line. Not yet, but I have fragments, enough to lead us to the truth. He shook his head, a faint smile curving his mouth despite the tension. You're bluffing your way into safety. I'm buying us time, she corrected. Time to finish what he started. Mixa climbed into her mother's arms. Are the bad people coming again? Estia held her close. Some might, but Callum's people are coming first. The girl turned to him, eyes wide and trusting. Will you stay with us? Even after the water goes away? The question hit him like a punch. He hadn't thought that far ahead. Yet when he looked at Estia, at her strength, her fire, her fierce devotion, he already knew the answer. If you want me to, he said simply. Estia's expression softened. We do. And for the first time since the storm began, Callum Anderson allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of something, but the beginning.